Okay, Miss Amy Green Smith, I am so happy to have you here on It's My Pleasure today. How are you doing?
I am doing so great. I have recently been informed that you listened to my podcast 10 years ago.
Yes.
So I'm a little bit fangirling over you being a fan.
Yeah. We just were talking before we hopped on and press record, and I was like, I don't think I haven't really talked about it that much, but your podcast, it was the Joy Junkie at the time, and I think you
Uh-huh.
switched
Mhm.
later. Was the first podcast I'd ever listened to, and it was also the first podcast that I had known about that was kind of in the self growth, self help realm when I was be starting my coaching career. So I was like,
Yeah.
maybe one day I'll have a podcast like Amy, and here I am.
Oh,
And you get to be on
yes.
my
Look at
podcast.
you now. Yes, I'm so excited to hang out and discuss
Yeah,
stuff.
so fun. So, another thing that we were discussing before we got on was the longevity of your marriage. And I think
Mm,
that this is where I really would love to kind of start with our conversation,
sure.
because I've been with my guy for 21 years. And I think that there's something to be said. And I remember even thinking at the time, because I didn't have a lot of friends that had been in long term relationships. Like George and I had been together forever. And looking at you both of like, here's some more people that have been together for a long time and seem to actually give a shit about each other
Mhm.
and love each other. So
Yeah.
I would love to just hear just a little bit about like what this has been like being in this committed long-term relationship for as long as you have been with also being young.
Yeah, so I was definitely one of those kids that was the kind of the old soul.
Mm.
And so I would joke always that I had been trying to get married since I was 12. Every guy
Yeah.
I dated in high school, I always wanted to be like, "So, do you think we should get married eventually when we graduate?" Like, it just was so I was ready to have the tough conversations. I was ready to be vulnerable. I had such an incredible father who had fostered the ability for me to have comfort in the breadth of human emotion. He used to do these adorable little games with me where he would say, "Okay, show me excited." And I'd go, "Ah." And then he's so, "Show me scared." "Show me sad." And so the sort of implication of that was that there was a place for all emotions. And I think a
Mm.
lot of the the anecdotes around you kind of marry somebody like your primary caregiver, is there. I think there's a lot of truth to that.
Yeah.
And my partner, Mr. Smith, that I always affectionately call him, his mom was just a beacon of light. So I think there was a lot of influence that we both had early on.
Mhm.
But something that I think is really, really important to underline is that monogamous long-term love is incredibly glorified in our culture. And I
Yes.
don't necessarily think that that's the right answer for everyone.
Yes.
And I also think that tenured relationships in the past have been basically one of women having zero freedom and being reliant on a partner to own property or to be able to work and now, even now, we don't have autonomy over our own bodies. So I think we have to be really understanding that a lot of the messages that we've received around partnership have been fueled by a very patriarchal influence
Yeah.
that for women, you're only valuable if you can procreate, if you are beautiful. We need these different monikers to the prefix. Are you married? Are you a Ms.? Are you a Mrs.? Like, we need to know your eligibility. We don't do
Yeah.
that with men.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I like to throw that out as a disclaimer because I think ethical non-monogamy, polyamory, singlehood, like
Yes.
there's some beauty to all of that.
Yes.
So in fact, there's been a recent study come out, I'm sure you've seen it, that the happiest people in the world or happiest people in the US are single,
Yeah.
unmarried women. And I'm like,
Yes.
well, because that's a lot easier.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I
I
think I
love
think
that.
it's warrants underlining.
Yeah. And I love that you brought that up as like a disclaimer. And, I think the reason that I even wanted to start there with you was because the energy at which you which I felt from your relationship was different. And even how you talked about
Mm.
like an old soul and like why I wanted this, like
Yeah,
because I was ready for the hard conversations, because I was open to vulnerability, because I wanted to explore like this whole host of human emotions. And I think that is very different, like you said, than how most people enter marriage or enter these long term relationships of more of like, oh, well, this is just the next box to check, or
that's
we've
right.
been, we should, or really abandoning so many of the emotions, honestly, for those of us socialized as women, especially in heterosexual relationships, right, is abandoning so many emotions so that we can fit into this box, so that we can make
Mm.
that relationship work in order to get that, like you said, eligibility status out there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that's reminding me, I remember saying early on, because I got married when I was 20. I turned 20 in May and got married in August. And that was 25 years ago. And I remember everyone thought I was knocked up,
Yeah.
which my favorite thing when people would go, "Oh, are you pregnant?" And I'm like, "No, I actually don't really like children."
Yeah.
And then they didn't know what to do with that because that was
Yeah.
also an
They're like,
unacceptable
wait,
thing to
then why
say.
are you getting married? You're not pregnant. You don't
Like,
even
ooh.
want, like, you don't like kids. So what's happening?
And I'm like, could it possibly be that we've been conditioned to believe that that's our lot in life?
Yeah.
And I had a friend who always said, I'm waiting on the feeling. If I never have that feeling, if I never have that urge to have a child, then I'm not going to do it just for some societal obligation. And I was
Yeah.
always like, yeah, I hear that. And I'm also not waiting for the feeling because I'm pretty sure it's not going to be here.
Yeah.
But I would say to people that getting married was one of the most liberating things I had ever done for myself. And
Say
I
more
think that,
about that.
well, I felt, and I know you've talked about this on some of your recent solo shows, how the element of feeling safe with somebody, how
Mhm.
that fosters so much intimacy. And that was very much the case for me. Have always felt and still feel like when I am with him, my nervous system calms.
Mm.
It feels like home. And that has always been the case.
Yeah.
So for me, I didn't get married and lose anything. And I don't think that's the case for most people.
Yeah.
And I was not interested in cooking and cleaning. I was not interested in any of the domestic arts. And and again, I'm a total choice feminist. If that's what fills up your spirit, knock yourself out. Like go for it. I almost said knock yourself out.
Oh,
Um,
yeah. I thought you were about to say knock yourself up, and I was like, do that too, if that's what you want to do. Get knocked up
yeah.
on your own, knock yourself out, do all the things. Yes.
And I think both of us were really open to co-creating a relationship outside of societal stigmas. And
Mm.
I remember he had subscribed to Gourmet magazine for years. His mom owned a restaurant for a while. He loved to cook. And it's not that outlandish now to have, a cis male being the one who wants to cook in the household.
Yeah.
But at the time, everyone was like, I mean, this was late 90s.
Yeah.
Everyone was like, "Oh, how do you?" They would turn to him and they would say, "How do you feel about that?" That she and he's like, "It's fine." Like, what? And I always was like, "Why the hell would I sign up for this? Why would I sign up to take on all this labor when we both are contributing to this household?" Like, it never made logical sense to me, nor
Yeah.
did I have parents that really said, don't behave like that or you'll never get married or no man will ever want that. Or I had a lot of socialization around religious trauma,
Yeah.
and that sort of thing highly affected like purity culture and things like that, how I viewed my own queerness, for example.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of stuff that definitely was affected by my upbringing, but there was never really any absence of love. And I do remember very clearly that there was a moment where I was probably 14 years old. And there was some boy who kind of broke my heart. And I remember thinking vividly, if I have this capacity to show up in this way, if I have this capacity to love like this,
Yeah.
or to be vulnerable like this, there has to be somebody else out there who's the same way. And I
Mm,
don't think that most of us engage with heartbreak in that way. And
right.
why would we?
Yeah.
Because it goes, oh, I have evidence now that this is painful. Let's put all these walls up. And
Mm,
so we walk around desiring intimacy, but not being willing to be vulnerable. And I know you've talked about this all the time, but your ability to experience intimacy in a relationship is directly related to how vulnerable you are willing to be.
yeah.
But most of the time we roll into relationship going,
Yeah.
you first, you be vulnerable first, because there's risk involved. And
Absolutely.
so one of the reasons why I think I get to experience the depth and this unbelievable intimacy in a partnership is the exact same reason why either one of us could destroy the other one in a heartbeat. It's like you're in that deep. You have to be willing to risk. And I don't think we get a lot of great examples of that risk actually being safe.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that answer so much because I've experienced the same thing in my own relationship, right? It's like that fear of like that level of possible devastation. When
Yeah.
you really are like have allowed yourself to open up, have allowed yourself to get vulnerable, the risk is bigger. Like this person could crush me, and how do you also create safety in the knowing that that could be a possibility? One of the things that you said that I wanted to come back to, because I do feel like so many, women and especially people that have tuned into this podcast before haven't had those same ideas that you talked about, of because of the way that we've been socialized, right? Of like the reasons that we're getting married, why we're getting married, why we're getting into this kind of like a partnership, but then now are in relationships where they do notice that there is so much, acquiescing towards like these norms or carrying the mental load, or like you're like, I would never sign up for that. And it's like, I think a lot of people, it's like they didn't even know they were signing up for it. And then
Yes.
now find themselves in this position of like, this doesn't feel good. Like, I
Yeah.
don't like this. I don't like carrying the mental load, the emotional load, all of these responsibilities. So, for a person that's listening, that is kind of like waking up to this like
Yeah.
inner knowing and truth in them, and may even hear some of these words and might be experiencing a little bit of self judgment of like, why didn't I know that
Oh,
I was
yeah.
signing up for this? How would you offer for them to start there, especially if there's any self judgment going on? And then I would love for us to get into a conversation about how to start having those type of conversations
Sure.
with a person when you know that the way that the roles have been kind of laid out aren't lining up for what's true inside you anymore.
Sure. Well, first of all, how on earth would you know? How
Yeah.
on earth would you know? Just even now, walk down any toy aisle and
Mm,
you will see all sorts of caretaking toys for little girls. Here's how
mhm.
you caretake for a baby, which, by the way, is kind of fucking ridiculous that we
Yeah.
teach little girls how to, like, that's so inappropriate in my to
Can we
put
put this
such
in the grown men aisle? Like we should put all the baby dolls and the diapers and all of that in the grown men area. Like you should all know how to do this.
well, even
Ah,
if you look back historically,
yeah.
during the Second World War, women went to work. We did all that shit that men
Yeah.
were doing. We were in the factories. We were doing all of that physically hard labor that men seem to think we're not capable of, which I just totally cleaned out my pipes in my bathroom by the other day, by the way,
Yeah.
because I'm a bad bitch and I can do that. We all can. But there was a very strategic marketing ploy that happened in the 1950s saying, oh shit, all these women love working. We
Mhm,
better glorify home care. We
mhm,
better make it so sexy to get this brand new washing machine and this brand new vacuum cleaner. And that's also when we saw massive spikes in drug use for women,
mhm,
because we started portraying this huge image that you're supposed to want this. And if you don't, there's something wrong with you. So
mhm,
I need to spell out that this We have been gaslit into believing that this is what we want. I mean, think about even now. We think it's so beautiful for a father to give us away.
Yeah.
At, like, oh no, no, it's my, no, you don't need to ask permission from my parents.
Yeah.
Ask me. It's
Yeah.
my life.
Yeah.
And so again, but we go, oh, that's so romantic. Not to mention Disney, where every princess is married off at 16. So anyway, how could you know? How could
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
The other thing that I want to say about the dynamic in your relationship that you have now and addressing tough conversations, a lot of times, and I see this with a lot of high achieving women in the workplace too, is a lot of the men that they engage with are not necessarily coming from a place of malice or
Mhm.
ill intent by
Mm.
not taking on the labor or by not thinking about how their actions could affect other people.
Yeah.
They simply haven't been conditioned that they would have to.
Yeah.
So it's also on us to educate. So the same way we've been conditioned to always think about, oh my gosh, you could never say that. That's going to hurt somebody. Or, oh gosh, what is this other person going to think? That's just not typically, and again, this is a sweeping generalization, on a majority of cis het men. That's
Yeah.
not on their radar. So it
Yeah.
doesn't mean that they are always coming from a place of, I believe that a woman, it's her place and to take care of the home and subservient, da 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 da. But this is why I feel so strongly about advocating for yourself, is because you have to say, hey, listen, there are a myriad, a litany of things that I'm carrying in this household. For example, do you have any idea what size underwear our child wears?
Yeah.
And when they need new ones? Do you have
Yeah.
any idea if when the dues are needing to be paid for their summer camp, or when the decision has to be made? Like there are so many things that's just not on their radar.
Yeah.
So if you are in a partnership where you are wanting to start having these conversations, there's a handful of things that I think you need to know. One is, I don't know if you've talked about this on the show. I'd imagine you would, but seek out the game, the book, Fair Play. Have you talked
Yeah.
about
I
Fair
mentioned
Play?
that a couple of times. Yeah. It's incredible. Such a
It
great
can,
resource.
when you are charged about something, when you are riled up and you go into a conversation feeling like you're going to fucking listen to me and I am going to tell you exactly why you take advantage of me, blah, blah, blah. And even though you feel validated and vindicated in doing so, it very rarely, if ever, will yield the results that you're looking for.
Right.
So you have to go into the conversation embodying the emotional current you want to elicit from the other person.
Mm.
So if you want them to be combative, great, go in guns blazing.
Yeah.
But if you want to genuinely be heard, you have to enter into a conversation in a calm, tranquil way.
Yeah.
And that does not happen if you just found out that your partner didn't pay a bill that you thought they were going to handle, or they forgot to pick up the kid and now it's on you, or something like that. Those are the moments when we want to read them the riot act. We
Yeah.
want to take them to school. Yes, your anger is valid, 100%, but find a way to offload that. I call those emotional releases, where you're able to work through the anger. And then once that's passed, then you can go in and try to have a conversation about resolution.
Mm-hmm.
The reason I bring up fair play is it can be so helpful to have an outside source,
Yeah.
as opposed to you being the one who has to advocate for everything or educate or teach. Because then the other partner is like, I didn't need a TED talk about, feminist agenda, right? Or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
So sometimes it can be helpful to hear it from an outside source. But as far as starting to broach these conversations, I have sort of a bevy of different things that can be helpful. One of them is to really be aware of your emotional state,
Mm-hmm.
but also the emotional state of your partner. Because
Mm.
sometimes you listen to a podcast or you're reading a book, you talk to a friend, you get all empowered and you're like, I'm going to go handle this shit right now.
Yeah.
And you go to talk to your partner and maybe they just got their ass handed to them by their boss, or they just lost a huge client, or they got laid off or something. And they're not in the space to genuinely hear you.
Mm-hmm.
So something that I think is really important is getting conversational consent. So
Yeah.
to say, hey, listen, there's a handful of things that I've been mulling over lately or that I've been thinking about, and I'd really like to get your thoughts on it. I'd like us to give it the attention it deserves. When do you have some free time?
Mm-hmm.
Please do not say we need to talk. In
Yeah.
the history of all relationships, we need to talk immediately conjures up all sorts of defense. They're going, holy shit, what did I do? I'm in trouble. We're in trouble. But if you say, hey, listen, there's something I want to run by you. I'd love to get your thoughts on something. I've been thinking about something that I think we could really deserve some
Mm,
attention. And if your partner says, what is it about? For Christ's sakes, just tell them
yeah.
and say, but we don't need to get into it right now. It might be something like, I don't feel fully settled about the conversation we had about homeschooling, or I don't feel, or there's stuff that I've been hearing about new ways to kind of spice up our sex life. Give them just a Cliff's Notes of this is what it's about. But I'd really like for us to have a conversation when we're both ready for it. Make
Yeah.
sure, because think about it when you're on the opposite side. You have a boss, you have a best friend who's like, hey, I want to run some stuff by you. And you're like, okay, what's it about? And they're like, we'll get to it. And you're like, "Ugh."
Yeah.
Like, just give a little something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that because I do think that there's so much worry. And going back to like the beginning of our conversation, like helping create safety in somebody's nervous system. Like, it's like our responsibility to do that for ourselves, but also there's things that we can do to add to it. There's things that we can do to influence. And, as we know, like having a conversation when somebody is really triggered isn't conducive to anybody's ideal agenda because you don't even have access to like your prefrontal cortex. Like this is nothing that's like no good is really going to come out of like those places when we don't feel grounded, when we don't feel truly settled. So having that, like what I love that you call it conversational consent, because it really is just like prompting, here it is. Don't like it's like not a worrisome thing. This is just kind of the topic. And let me know when you have some time. So
Exactly.
on that same vein, I know in one of the episodes you talked like about what you could do like so this is the preparatory ahead of time, right? Like how to
Yeah.
help, how to begin broaching it, how to bring it up and some great ways to do that. But like what happens in the middle of a conversation when you find yourself like really like triggered or your guard goes up or whatever, like in the moment, how do you find is the best way to kind of move from there?
Well, something that I talk about a lot that I think we're dancing around is the concept of the surface issue versus the root issue.
Mm-hmm.
And the surface issue is the thing that you can litigate. It's the thing that we usually fight for rightness around. The root issue is how each person feels
Mm-hmm.
emotionally
Mm-hmm.
about that surface issue. For example, if one common situation that happens in a lot of households is frustration about how to load the dishwasher,
Yeah.
right? So each person could double down about, well, that is wrong, but this is right. No, why would you do that? Why would you put those up there? The forks upside. I don't know
Yeah.
why this is such a big deal to you. And all of a sudden you're fighting over something that's not what this is really about.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you start asking yourself, what's really happening here? What is this altercation around the dishwasher say to me? What does it mean to me? And it might be, I don't feel valued in our relationship. I
Mhm.
feel like whatever you say goes. It could be not even related to the relationship. It could be you are so overloaded at work or you have said yes to so many things that you are overwhelmed and you are snapping at everything. And ultimately, the dishwasher doesn't matter all that much. So, oftentimes, when we are engaged in a conversation like that, the things that trigger us the most are that rightness.
Yeah.
If you stop trying to fight about the surface issue and you go to the root issue, which is scary as all hell because it's vulnerable,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
you say, instead of, what we need to do logistically with household chores, great. We don't need to get into all of that. But if we say something like, if I'm really honest, what this comes down to for me is I don't feel as respected in
Mm,
this household as I want to be.
mm,
And so that is far harder to argue with,
yeah.
right? And sometimes when we are super triggered, the other person will start telling us why we shouldn't feel that way. Well,
Mm,
you shouldn't feel that way. That's not, I do respect you.
mhm.
That's never helpful.
No,
So
no.
if we're talking about in an acute situation, the best thing you can do is take a big, deep breath
Mhm,
and talk slowly.
mhm,
Just pausing, just pausing, taking a big, deep breath, and then stopping and thinking, is this conversation container that we are in right now, is it conducive to resolution?
mhm.
And if it's not, if it's we're too charged, we're too emotional, there's too much stuff going on, have the courage to put a pin in it. And I
Mm,
don't mean slam the door and run away. I mean acknowledging what's happening in the container. I can feel and this is ownership, self
yeah,
awareness.
yeah,
I can feel myself in such a triggered state. And I don't want to start saying things that I don't mean or
yeah,
that are damaging and that we can't take back. Can we just take a pause for 30 minutes? Or can we revisit this after the kids go to bed? Can we talk about this tomorrow? I believe that it's okay to go to sleep on things.
yeah,
Sometimes that's exactly what your nervous system needs.
yeah,
Yeah. So there's a handful of things
yeah,
in that, but I do think freedom to pause, taking a deep breath, talking slowly, and or putting a pin in it.
yeah. And I love how you circle back to like it's not just like a pause and a slam your door and walk away. I will very honestly admit that has been, one of the tactics that I have like resulted to in the past because my nervous system does get so triggered and I feel so like amped up. And, before I kind of knew how to handle it, it was like, I just can't take anything else. Like it felt
Yeah.
so overwhelming. It felt like my body was going to explode. I was going to explode. You shut down in some areas and you're feeling like you're exploding in others. And this would
Yeah.
have been so helpful to know that it's not just like taking a deep breath, but I think let me come back to it because, in this place of like the wanting to be right, also, yes, me.
I mean,
It's like that, that
who
play.
wants to be wrong? Like
Right.
literally no one.
Right. And like that's so empowered in it. Like the idea of just also asking for that, right? Asking for that space or that permission to pause and come back could have almost felt, I think, at the time, like I'm losing, right? Like I'm losing this conversation or I'm losing this like fight, right? Of inside. But I just really love how you presented it there because it's like, no, that self-awareness of like, nothing's actually going to come of this, like no
Yeah.
kind of resolution and the acknowledgement of that feels very accessible in moments like that. I think
Yes.
even when you have all of that, like seeing red, I want to be right. I don't want to lose. I don't want to, walk away as the one that was wrong in the situation kind of feelings and deep
Mhm.
breathing and pausing and talking about coming back. Right. And
Yes.
I will come back. I will be able to, because I think that's the other thing especially for me personally, is that I didn't realize when I didn't know how the nervous system worked that like I could actually have a conversation once I calmed down. But like
Yes.
I don't want to talk anymore right now. Like I can't access anything. I can't
That's right.
access anything. And I have zero love for you in this moment. So please just like let
Yeah.
me breathe. Like, because otherwise
Yeah.
it's not gonna be a good situation. So I really love that.
Well, what you're referring to, the psychological community would call being flooded. Like
Yeah.
you are flooded, and what is happening in that moment is you go into fight, flight, freeze, fawn.
Yes.
So it is like you are engaging with a mountain lion.
Right.
And that's not a place where you can be like, oh, what could we do differently in our household chores? Or what could we do differently in the bedroom? Like, you're not creative. You are just trying to survive. And you're
Yeah.
also, sure as fuck, not empathetic to the other person.
No.
So, what we have to remember in conversation is we just want to be heard. We want to be seen, both parties.
Yeah.
And we know from the work of Dr. John Gottman that we only make change as humans if we feel understood, if we feel heard.
Hmm.
What's difficult about all of this is it's counterintuitive,
Yeah.
because when we feel a sense of threat, we go into defense.
Yeah.
So you have to almost work against your natural inclination in order to maintain that calm, tranquil energy in order to have this conversation.
Yeah.
But one of the things that Gottman talks about a lot too, that I think you are embodying in how you're discussing this, is he has this concept around turning toward one another, turning away,
Mm-hmm.
or turning against.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, the turning away is fleeing,
Yep.
essentially, the flee response, and turning against is sort of the fight response.
Yep.
And so there are ways to turn towards one another, even when we're declining something.
Mm-hmm.
So to turn towards somebody and end a conversation would be, hey, listen, I'm realizing that I am incredibly emotionally overwhelmed. If you have the vernacular with your partner, use terms like flooded.
Yeah.
Don't weaponize them, but use them. I'm realizing that I'm not in a place where I can hear you. And I know that's not fair to either one of us. I need to take a break. That's
Mhm.
still turning towards.
Yeah. Yeah.
Turning against is becoming vitriolic, fighting. Well, you always this, blah, blah. Turning away is stonewalling, slamming the door, leaving,
Yeah.
driving away. So there are ways to turn towards. You can do that if you decline a sexual advance,
Yeah.
right? You can say, oh my gosh, that sounds so incredible. And I know I am not in that headspace right now.
Yeah.
That's a turning towards someone whilst saying, I'm not on the same page.
Yeah.
And so those are sort of the practices that we want to think about. But again, it's a practice.
It's a practice. Yeah.
It's counterintuitive. When
Yeah.
we are threatened, we want to defend.
Yeah.
So, but again, I would suggest trying to also broach conversations from the very beginning when the two of you are in a calm place, when
Yeah.
you're actually in a state of mind that could foster a productive conversation. And this is not isolated just to intimate partnerships.
Yeah.
This is also familial relationships, friends, coworkers, etc.
Yeah. Yeah. So good. I just I love that. I talk about it a lot on the podcast of like, our intention of connection. At the end of the day, if your intention, right, and it's that exact same that you're saying, if our intention is to feel connected, right, even if we need a break, even if we need to go away, even if we need to sort our own shit out, it's like that hand, that turning towards that hand, like, hey, and I can't right now. I love
Yes.
you. I see you, give me a minute kind of thing. And you might still drive away, but you at least said, I'm going to come back.
That's right.
Yeah.
And if you and all oftentimes in relationship dynamics, there will be one who's the fleer and
Yeah.
there'll be one who's the fighter. There will be the one who wants to resolve it right now, God damn it. And there'll be someone else who needs to process it a little more.
Yeah.
So when you are outside of the acute crisis, it's a great thing to just converse about what each of you need
Yeah.
when crisis comes up.
Yeah.
Do you need time to think about it? Are you comfortable using words? Some people are so conditioned to not speak up, men included, that they won't use words. Maybe you have to use symbols. Maybe you have to do like a timeout with your hands, or maybe you have a little stuffed animal that you use, that you throw it in the middle and you go,
Yeah.
and that's the symbol for I love you and I'm committed to coming back to this conversation, but I can't go anymore.
Yeah.
Right. But you've
Yeah.
crafted that communication container ahead of time.
Right. Right. I love that. Yeah. And it goes into like your prep work about having the conversation. But then as you're continuing to like really create these channels of open communication and connection to be like, did you see that happen? Like we talked about this. This is what I was saying before. I'm flooded. I got to go. Like it can be
Right.
like this reference back, which is so good. Okay, so one of the things, I know you've listened to a little bit of the podcast that I really like to focus on, for women is because we haven't been socialized well around our relationships with our sexuality or our pleasure at all. There is a lot of like rewiring that we're doing of how we're looking at these of sex in general
Yeah.
differently.
Yeah.
And, that it actually can be for us, for our benefit, for us to
Mhm.
feel connected, for us to feel alive and lit up. And in the same realm of feeling right, or like hold, like that feeling of like righteousness, right?
Yes.
So a lot of times when I'm coaching women, that feeling of like righteousness comes up. And I can see it right away of like, it's still looking at the sexual relationship completely as something I'm giving away. Otherwise, maybe I would consider this if it was for me. But when they're in this place of like I said, righteousness along the same vein of what we're talking about here, of where it feels like if I were to engage in a sexual relationship, I'm losing. Like somehow
Right.
I'm losing, right? Like I am losing like that righteousness, or somehow I am losing and looking at the act of intimacy and sexual pleasure as
Yeah.
now I've lost. Now I've lost that upper hand somehow.
Mhm.
What would you say to those women that are feeling that?
I would say, first of all, of course you are,
Yeah. Yeah.
because we've been trained that that's our currency.
Yeah.
Our currency is our beauty. Our currency is our thinness and our fertility.
Hmm.
So, and so, of course, we would weaponize it. Of
Yeah.
course, we would look at it as like, I'm going to withhold that then. So, I think there's a piece of self exploration and you getting in touch with what do you like
Hmm.
physically? What do you enjoy sexually
Hmm.
outside of your relationship?
Hmm.
Period. Just
Yeah.
as who you are as an individual. I would also venture a guess that there's probably a decent amount of other things in the relationship that need to be rectified before you actually feel safe.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're in a tit for tat arrangement, there's probably other things that we need to talk about before you're able to get to that place. The other thing that I'll say is a majority, and I know you've talked about this on the show too. I think with Dr. Shima, is that her? I'm butchering it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Shama. I'm trying to remember the episode too, but yes, yeah,
uh,
continue on.
a brilliant doctor. uh, is that so much of our education, so much of our medication, our science, our medical experiences have been based off of studies around men. So
Yeah,
when we judge our sexual response, our sexual desire, how we feel turned on or not turned on, we grade it against being normal, which is the male
yeah,
normal,
yeah,
as opposed to this just works for me.
yeah.
If you have not done so, I highly, highly suggest the book Come As You Are by Emily Nagoski.
Mhm.
It is one of the most brilliant pieces of literature, I think, for sort of this generation around female sexuality.
Yeah.
She also just recently released a book called Come Together, which is a
Mhm.
couples book.
Yeah.
But that book in particular really unearthed for me that I was judging how I responded, my sexuality, how I viewed sex based off of what we've always said is normal, which is essentially just male
Yeah.
and cis male, by the way, not to mention all the other elements of being queer or non-binary or trans or whatever else.
Yeah.
And the social implications of those things
Yeah.
that also thwart your ability to step into your sexuality or own your own pleasure. So I would say it's not only about the sex, it's also about you owning what turns you on, period.
Mhm.
And one of the things that Emily Nagoski talks about all the time is what puts the brakes on for you. What
Mhm.
puts on the brakes, what puts on the gas. For me, spontaneity puts the brakes on real fast. I do
Mhm.
not like spontaneity in pretty much any area of my life.
Yeah.
But we're kind of told that that's not sexy and that's not awesome. And I'm like, no, no, no. I need it scheduled.
Yeah.
I need to
Yeah.
get my head in the game
Yeah.
because how I am aroused is different than my partner. So
Yeah.
we have created systems around that. And part of it is me actually advocating for it. And another element is him growing and not making me wrong for that.
Yeah.
So we will do like I have sort of this whole ritual on Saturday nights where I do my shower and all of my primping and feeling good in my body. And then I light all these candles and I get music going. And then I basically say, hey, you can go get in the shower. And then I like to watch him shower. And then, we switch it up
Yeah.
quite a
Yeah.
bit, but we have a way in which he doesn't have to stay for all of that time that I need,
Yeah.
right? It's a way that we can both be honored instead of why are you this way or what's wrong with you? It's
Yeah.
a what puts the gas on for you?
Yeah.
What puts the brakes on? The brakes for me is if anyone's not clean or has bad breath, like I cannot move beyond that, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so it's those things. For some people, it's like, I can't if I know my child is right there or
Mhm.
in the next
Yeah.
room. So you
Yeah.
have to find workarounds. But a lot of it is around education for yourself and your partner being willing to be educated on it. And then finding systems that work so that both partners can feel honored.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. We call it on the podcast a bridge to the bedroom, right? Where it's really like
Mm,
creating that space where we're like bridging into that like mindset, into that body, into that feeling from the day to day, from parenting, from work, from whatever might be going on. How do we create really that bridge? And, going back, I think that it's also just so important for us to ask like what you were saying before, what is the surface issue versus what is like the underlying, like what is really
mhm.
going on here, like why do I feel so closed off? Is because of course as we're going towards these things and the intimacy, but like why do I feel so closed off? Like is it really
Mhm.
because they're not taking out the garbage? Like is that really, would all of a
Yeah.
sudden I'd be turned on if they started taking out the garbage, like, or
Yeah.
what else am I really asking for? So
Yeah.
I love
Because
that.
it's likely that it's not about the garbage. That's the surface
Yeah.
issue.
Yeah.
The root issue is, do I feel valued in this union?
Yeah.
Do I feel appreciated? Do the things that I do go noticed?
Yeah.
One thing that we do all the time, because we have a very equitable household. He does all his groceries, I do mine. He does his cooking, I do mine. Laundry is separate. We have separate sides of the fridge, separate sides of the pantry. And we literally never fight about, we very rarely fight ever, but never about domestic stuff because
Yeah.
everything's on a system.
Yeah.
Whose turn is it to load the dishwasher? Everything is systemized. So now I forgot where I was going. Perimenopause.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think you're just going, like, what is that surface issue of like, I
Oh,
want to
yes.
be valued in this situation, right? Like, that's really what I'm asking for. It isn't just like a garbage thing, but it's like, what is that meaning to me over and over again? And how can I come
Yes.
back to like expressing the root issue here that's really putting
Yeah.
that guard up in the first place?
I think one of the other sort of lies that we get gaslit into is if we are compatible, if we love each other, we're just going to magically know what the other person needs. And that could not be a bigger fallacy.
Yeah. And that it changes too. Like it's
Yes,
such like so much of it changes, as after being together with so many years. I mean, so many things I thought that I needed when I was 20 is much different in my 40s. Period.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. And having that ability to converse about those things, but also to advocate for them. Because if
Mhm.
you aren't saying, hey, I've realized that all of this domestic labor is informing that I don't feel valued in our union. I don't feel respected. I don't feel seen. I don't feel heard. Then you're going to just keep yelling about the dishwasher. You're going to
Yeah.
just keep yelling about the labor.
Yeah.
And also, that person doesn't really know what to do differently or how to
Right.
support you. So you have to kind of do the inner work to go, here's what this is really about. And then actually sharing that with the other person. Because if you don't say,
Yeah.
I need help with this, or, these are the things that would really mean a lot to me, the other person will naturally deduce either she loves doing it, she wants to do it,
Yeah.
or, oh, yep, thumbs up, or it's really easy for her. Or the common sentiment is, I'm sure if there was an issue, she would tell me. I mean, that makes logical sense. So if you're just walking around with all this resentment, all this animosity, and they would have no idea that this is as big of a deal to you or that this is what this is really about, then that's on you to express it in a way in which you can be heard. Because I cannot tell you how many times, and you've probably been in this boat too, Danielle, where I've said, well, have you spoken about that? And they will say, oh, absolutely. He knows.
Yeah.
And I'm like, how did you say it? Well, I scream and yell and I slam doors. And I'm like, how would you respond to that? Would you be like, I can't wait to be what you need?
Yeah.
Probably not.
Probably not.
So are you valid in your emotion and your sense of justice and feeling resentful? Absolutely. But you need to process that emotion separate from
Yes.
addressing the grievance
Yes.
so that you can be heard, so that you
Yeah.
can get your needs met.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that. Just like your emotional processing is really so that you can get closer to your end result, not further away from it. Like you're not losing anything from allowing yourself to like process those emotions. And I think, another thing that I heard in there that you were saying is or what I hear a lot is like they should just know, right? Like they
Yeah.
should know, they should be able to see if they were really paying attention to the house, they should see how tired I am and offer to help. And I think again, like we do ourselves such a disservice to go down that path and go down that narrative rather than like we could just also talk about it, because
Yes.
what we're conditioned to see, like you said, is so different. Like we have been quote unquote program conditioned, trained, and been practicing seeing that stuff for so long. So of course
Yeah.
that's going to be harder or easier for us to see. And the idea that our partner would automatically be able to see that is also where we get ourselves in sticky situations.
Completely. And I had this situation actually not too long ago with a friendship. And here I am thinking I'm being so supportive of her. She's going through a really difficult time. And so I say to her, you are one of the strongest people I've ever known. You will absolutely get through this. You've gotten through hell in your past. There's no
Mm,
reason why you can't surmount this as well. And I'm thinking, I'm gassing her up. Like,
yeah,
here I am,
I'm
like
helping. Yeah.
I'm such a good friend. Well, she tells me later, she says, hey, listen, I so appreciate you always wanting to have my back and support me. But truth be told, I have always been the strong one. I have always had to be the one to keep everyone together. What would be helpful for me to hear is it's okay to fall apart. It's
Mm,
okay to lean on me, literally giving me the words. And I've done this to
yeah.
Mr. Smith as well, both of us.
Yeah.
And and I also don't want to be reminded of the hell I've gone through in the past. I don't want to go back there. That was really difficult. I don't want to even bring that up. So, did I get pissed at her? No. I went, fucking good to know. Good to
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
Now I can course correct
Yeah.
and be what you need.
Yeah.
But again, if she would have come at me yelling and screaming, you never give me what I need. You're never emotionally available. I'd been like, bitch, bye.
Yeah.
Right. But because she was able to say, I see your intention.
Mhm.
And, so it could be, again, a partner in your house does not see all of those things, again, because they maybe never saw it modeled that a man would have to observe
Yeah.
all of those things. Again, I'm speaking in heteronormative terms, but however they were conditioned to behave. But the other thing that's just straight up human is we're always worried about just ourselves. It's part
Yeah.
of how we survive.
Yeah.
So when we're walking around constantly thinking about what other people are thinking, or how can my partner not see this? How can my boss or my best friend not see this? It's because they're thinking about their shit.
Yeah. Yeah.
So again, it's not always from a place of malice. That's why the onus is on us to educate and invite. Say,
Mm,
here's what's going on. Here's how I interpreted that. Here's how it's showing up for me. And here's my request going forward
mm, mhm.
in a delivery in a way that you can actually be heard.
Yes. I love it. I love it. Okay, I feel like we could talk forever about all the things, but I'm going to give you one last question that I love to ask all of my guests, and that is what do you think would change if the women of the world were more pleasured?
Oh, oh my gosh. Everything. I mean, everything would change because I think, we've talked about pleasure a lot through the lens of sexual pleasure,
Mhm.
but I think there's pleasure in enjoying wealth.
Yeah.
I think there's pleasure in enjoying food
Mhm.
instead of being so worried about what that's going to do to my body and how people are going to perceive my body.
Mhm.
I think there's also pleasure to be had in rest
Yeah.
and downtime. And I really think this is such a crucial key to changing systems of oppression. So I'm going to go a little meta here. The way that systems of oppression, and here we're talking about it from a male female standpoint, but this could be applicable to straight, gay, thin, fat, old, young, you fill in the blank. But systems of oppression are able to stay in power as long as the oppressed party continues to believe that they don't matter as much. And
Mm,
if you don't believe that you matter as much, that means you don't take your downtime, you don't prioritize fun and recreation, and you don't prioritize pleasure.
mhm.
So it is one of the most essential pieces to taking up goddamn space
Yeah.
with our money, with our intellect, with our sexuality, with our body, like having the
Yeah.
audacity to take up space in a body.
Yeah.
All of that creates a ripple effect. That's what our children will see. That's what little boys will see, and they will revere it. I
Yeah.
just heard the other day somebody saying that their son was mentioning a female basketball player, and they were saying, like, oh, I just shot a this, and referred to the female, like in
Caitlin
a,
Clark. Yeah. Yeah.
yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I abhor sports. So thank you for that. Um, no matter who's playing.
Yeah.
But I was like, that's what will change.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what will change. And then there will be a ripple effect of allowing men to actually embody the part of themselves that is emotional.
Mm,
We tell them
mhm.
to shut that shit down by like age 11. Now you're gay, right?
Yeah.
Now you have to cut off an entire part of yourself. So no wonder they're the ones
Yeah.
that cause the wars and the most amount of crime and the domestic violence, fill in the blank. Like so much of this will change when
Yeah.
women take up space with their pleasure
Mm.
in
Yes.
all forms.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I love it. I love it. Okay. So tell all the people where they can find you, how they can get in touch with you if they'd like to learn about your work further. Where do you exist out in the ethers?
Yes. So my corner of the internet is over at amygreensmith.com.
Mhm.
And all of those names are spelled the basic bitch way, very simple and easy.
Yes.
And you can get your hands on a bunch of freebies over there. I've got some hypnosis tracks and a complimentary e-workbook that talks
Mm,
all about speaking up for yourself with 9 tangible action steps that you can take, challenges you can take. And then you can find me pretty much anywhere on social under the handle Hey Amy Green Smith. But like any self-respecting Gen Xer, I hang out the most on Instagram.
yeah.
And I've been a little bit off the radar with social lately, but that's the place to find me the most active, I'd say.
I love it. Thank you so much. And thank you for being here Okay, everybody, as always, it's been my absolute pleasure to be with you here this week. I hope you took away as much as I did from this brilliant conversation with Amy Greensmith. Make sure that if you loved what we were talking about, you show her some love on Instagram. Go connect, go download some of those freebies, and I will talk with you next week. See ya.